slideshow. And we're just going to go through it. I'm just going to do it this way because it's by the time I.
Do you want Sandra to share, Catherine, or would that be too complicated?
Unfortunately, okay. Is it better like this?
It's better.
Yeah, let's just go with this, okay? So, right,
Yeah.
and again, apologies. So basically what we're going to have a look at again, what is restorative practice, the types of processes that you could end up using, values and principles of restorative practice, core concepts, the different types of, again, processes that you can use, and what, when harm has happened, as it does often happen, like what can you do in those cases, and how can it be useful? So that's really what we're going to have a look at today. It originated from restorative justice. So in a way that started, if you like, restorative justice is a concept that's around since maybe the 1970s, and a seminal author about it that sort of began it. He was one of the grandparents of restorative justice. In 1977, he wrote an article. He was a criminologist, and he wrote an article called Conflict as Property. And basically what he was saying is, because our communities have now fragmented, and industrialization and everything that happened over the last centuries, and how the legal system grew and other systems grew, like to manage workplaces, and that we had lost our ability to manage conflict, and basically we handed them over. So we had nearly like a learned helplessness about conflict. So we hand over the conflicts to these experts, and it means then that we're in a legal system of some sort or another, some sort of an adversarial system. But in this criminal justice system, they would have said that it's now the state is the most important identity so it's the state that is taking the case. The victim, the person who was harmed, becomes a witness for the state, if you like, for the harm that was done. And the offender is somebody who is to be punished, or at best is to be sort of rehabilitated to make them fit for society again. So Christy was saying that really we need to take back our conflict that in some way has been stolen by lawyers and legal people and experts. So we need to take it back. And he envisaged a system where the people who were directly involved with the harm, the people who had been harmed, the people who were in some way responsible for the harm, and all the ripple effects of the harm that there always is, so that he needed to, that they needed to be at the center of any process for managing the harm and resolving the harm. So, in the criminal justice system, this is another guy, Howard Zer, who's a big father of restorative justice. He would say the criminal justice system asks, well, what law was broken, who broke it, and how do we punish them? Again, it's about the state, and the victim is the witness. Restorative justice asks, what harm was done and to whom was the harm done to? What was the harm? What were the implications of the harm? What were the impacts of the harm? What needs have arisen from the harm? And what needs to happen to repair the harm? Now, we use the word repair because that still is, how do we, you hear the word repair, or you hear the word, resolve, often in really difficult cases, you can't repair as in make it like it didn't happen. You can never do that, but you can do something, and there's different ways that we in the restorative practice field now believe that you can put things in place that will help people manage the harm better when it happens, and that you look at everything, you look at things, and an organization looks at things that happen as a real source of learning, that we learn how not to do it. We learn how was the system at fault here. What, you know, what could we have done better? What could and what's it like being in the center of this harm? Because we know whoever you are, wherever you're involved, you know, if you're involved, it's often not easy at all. So the other restorative practice, definition then of restorative practice. So restorative practice came from that, when people were saying, you know, it started going into schools, and they were saying, well, it's not in the legal system anymore, and but it was still initially, even though they started calling it restorative practice, it was used to sort of maybe manage discipline in a better way. And being more aware that, you know, people have voices. So all these things about the value of everybody's voice and being heard and fairness of processes, they were all started coming in. But after a while, then people started thinking, well, you know, what can we do here? Can we do something with our system and with our culture that will really work better for everybody, so that the possibilities for harm is minimized, and when it does happen, that that we can manage it in a better way, and using core principles that we know are very important to people and that help healing and restoration of people. So this is the IIRP have a definition of restorative practice that I sort of like. This is like it describes it as a social science that studies how to build social capital, the relationships and the value of each person, and achieve social discipline, which is cooperation, through participatory learning and decision making. So again, if you look at the idea of participatory leadership, distributive leadership, that type of thing, it's all connected. And the idea that in restorative practice, the notion is it's through relationships that everything, you know, that you need to work through relationships to manage things, you know, whatever you're doing, whether it's about connection, understanding, and acceptance, and the idea that everybody's voice is important. Not to say that there is no accountability happening. Of course there is. Accountability is a very important word in restorative practice, but it is not used in the way that it might be used in the media, whereas accountability is really about blaming. So, and people often move talking about accountability and don't really get to how come it happened and why it happened, and, you know, what was it like for everybody involved. So, so again, if you look at it as a way of, so I big into, you know, you can't really have a restorative system for harm alone. You need that proactive way of having a restorative way of being, or people are now saying even maybe replace the word restorative with relational, a relational way of being that focuses on building healthy relational practices and processes in us and between us, in organizations, families, and communities. So how is it that we work together? How do we manage things when there's differences, and when you know, when we feel things are wrong? How do we cope with that? How do we deal with it? How are we supported maybe in dealing with it? Can we talk about it, or do we stay silent? You know, so, and the culture of silence when harm happens, but the culture of silence when things are wrong also is very, and like I've done a lot of work where people have been silenced, but people are silenced in all sorts of ways, and there's power dynamics in organizations and all sorts of things that, you know, renders people silent. So if we were really trying to have a restorative organization, we're really trying to see, can everybody have a voice, and can we learn from everybody? What are we not seeing? What are our blind spots? So it's preventative and proactive, as well as being responsive in managing conflicts constructively. So we do have processes and systems for managing when conflict or when harm happens. We ensure that fairness of process is acknowledged and trusted, and that there is a high level of trust between those involved in the community and in the organisation and in the system. We explicitly acknowledge that harm happens. We know it happens. So those responsible for the harm and those affected by it are the core and crucial people to be involved in any way of dealing with it or addressing it. When harm happens, it ripples out into the community, which needs to be acknowledged as affected. So, and that community can be the workplace, it can be the hospital, it can be the community, it can be, you know, I remember a case where a judge suspended a jail sentence for a man who had abused a woman, a young woman, I think, and who had sexually abused a woman, and he was given a fine. He was, you know, and I think maybe the judge might have thought this was a bit like restorative justice, but it wasn't at all. He gave him a fine. He had to pay a fine, and the media was in uproar about it. But that family of that man who had done the harm, there was a wife and children involved, and nightly their houses, their windows were stoned, was smashed in, and there was, you know, abuse notes and letters left in their doorstep. So there was people who were affected by harm, you know, who weren't responsible or accountable for the harm, but they were affected and they were harmed themselves in their own way. So I was part of that study that I did with Marie Keenan and Barbara Walsh, and that about the restorative possibilities, transformative possibilities in cases of sexual abuse. When we spoke to the family members of people who were imprisoned and people who had harmed, who had abused, they were such lonely voices, because nobody had asked them before what it was like for them. Nobody who was, so they were very isolated. So again, these are some of the ripple effects of harm, like the isolation of people, the shame, and the silence comes with the shame. And shame is another core word in restorative practice, and we don't look at it in organizations enough, because as far as I'm concerned, it drives this, it is itself in itself an underground river that you know, that people are acting out of a lot of the time. So restorative practice engages those most affected by harm or an injustice in a process that helps the parties restore something, hopefully that can help them restore something that has been lost to themselves, and in some way can help them reconnect themselves and to others. So and I'll talk about that a little bit later. A healthy relational restorative culture must be in place in the system before before restorative responses to harm will be trusted. So if I'm used to a blame culture and I'm used to the idea of watch your back, you know, and then somebody tries to engage me in a restorative system, it's going to be very hard for me to believe it. Okay. So it's all about how we're doing what we're doing. Decisions may be made, people may have to be let go, you know, people may have to be suspended, and all, you know, things may happen, but it's how we do it, and what we do first. Do we look after the people who have been traumatized? If harm has happened inadvertently, how do we manage it? You know, like, because there's, and I know I've heard Loretta and Lorraine talking about the idea of, you know, the other victims, the second victims and the third victims and the fourth victims, you know, of when harm happens. And I think that's very interesting. So, and again, it's just, it's proactive and responsive. So essential principles for restorative work are involve safety, confidentiality, voluntary, informed choice. So I can't be saying, well, you need to do a restorative process. You know, you know, do you want to hear a little bit about it? Or maybe before you even suggest it, asking what might help. Principle of inclusion. If you're leaving somebody out, why are you leaving them out? And have you a very good reason for leaving them out? The principle of connection, that we're all connected in some way to another. So if harm happens to you, that in some way it happens to me, through that sort of, you know, nearly that butterfly effect. Support. How can I support you? How can we support you? What's it like for you? Accountability. And again, developing accountability is a byproduct of restorative processes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a bit, when I talk a bit about work. Myself and my colleague Barbara Walsh have just come out of working with past pupils who were abused by a Jesuit who died over 40 years ago. Fair process. It's really important. Do people perceive the process as fair? Is it respectful? And that symbiotic nature of support and accountability. If I feel I am not going to be shot, or I am not going to be, you know, metaphorically shot, obviously, and you are willing to listen to me, and you are understanding that I am full of shame and shock, and that you're there for me, it'll be much easier for me to actually process what happened and my role in it, and you know, and that, and it'll be much easier. Anyway, that's enough about that. Yeah. Restorative values. So if we had more time, if we were in a smaller group, because we would always try and model like what being restorative is, and that's all about engagement in some way. You know, where you engage, but your values is, so everybody who is in the health system, or you know, most people do what they do because, you know, it's important to them to contribute in some way in the world. But so if I were to ask all of you, you know, and you could just even put a little, you know, word in, what is the value that has you doing what you're doing? You know, why does what you do matter to you? And maybe, you know, so what difference? And an awful lot of people would say, well, you know, that's why I do what I do. I do want to make a bit of a difference. You know, that's important to me. So I would say, what's important to you, and how come is it important to you? So we ask sort of questions in a restorative process that we hope are meaningful, and that have meaning for, you know, everybody involved. Yeah. So so in any restorative process that you're engaging in, whether it's working with one person, whether it's working with two people in a sort of a mediation type scenario, or whether it's you know, somebody having a meeting, somebody who is involved, is maybe accountable through their role, is having a meeting with people who have experienced harm. There's 3 phases, and the first phase is always about building community. So what do you do? How do you make people feel safe? How do you make them feel comfortable? How do you develop a relationship with them? Now, some people who are very, very strong work, you know, very core in the HSE, core people have done a process, a course in restorative practice that's being run in Maynooth University every February. And So there was four wonderful people in this class of 20 from the HSE. And as people built trust and built community over the weeks, one week when people were sharing, they described their reactions to knowing that people from the HSE were in the room. Two people in particular just were saying that they got scared at the idea that one person was somebody who had not been vaccinated, had chosen not to be vaccinated, and she was really, but she was able to share that. Both of those people were able to share that with the class and with the people from the HSE, because now they saw them as people, not as symbols of the HSE, not as caricatures. They saw them as humans. So a restorative process brings humanity into what happened. However, whatever happened. The second phase is exploring the issue. It might be just about, well, how do we get, you can have restorative meetings that are just, and they're proactive, and it's about getting things done and looking at the issues and how to manage the issue, and how to, it mightn't be to repair the harm, but it'd be, what are the action steps we're going to take next. But if there was harm, or if it might be exploring the harm, or how to manage harm that comes down the line, and how will we repair the harm. So they're the sort of three, and again, repair, restore, cannot undo, but it can maybe help people get unblocked and have a new story for themselves. One woman, Alva Griffith, who has spoken very, very eloquently about her experience of restorative justice. She talks about really wanting a restorative meeting the man who was sentenced for violently sexually assaulting her. There was a meeting, a film called The Meeting, which is an excellent meeting directed by Alan Gilsonan, made about this, and she actually played herself in the film. The offender did not obviously play himself. There was actors then, but she played, and the person who supported her in having restorative justice actually played her support person as well. That was Marie Keenan. But what she would say is that it changed the memory card for her having that meeting. And I asked her, because there was no guarantee that the man who had abused her was actually going to come and meet her. So that was all, and there's a big long process about getting that type of stuff done. And I asked her because that was my concern. You don't want to do harm, you don't want to add further trauma to people. And I asked her, what if he hadn't agreed to have met you? What would that have been like then? And she said, I would have been very disappointed, but I still would have been really glad that I went through the process, because I got a lot from the process, and in the end of the day, the process itself, the engaging, the taking her own power. But she said when she was in the room with him, she had no intention of, she knew, because the facilitators were saying to her, look, he's not going to apologize. I don't think he has a lot of remorse. But actually, when he heard her story, and after he left, he wrote her a letter and said that he cried for a day, that it really affected him. So having that meeting, and he actually, and he did apologize to her in a letter. But she said that changed the memory card for her. Instead of now remembering the night of the abuse and the trauma of the abuse, she remembers, she just was the first person who was leaving the room, and she just remembered the lightness and the smile on her face as she left the room, leaving him sitting there with a sort of, I think she called it a shamefaced sort of smile, like on his face. So, there's lots of possibilities when things happen. So what happens when someone hurts us? Well, all these things. We lash out, we blame, we withdraw, we distance ourselves, we put up walls, we lose trust, we become angry, we want revenge. If you want to put anything else up, put it in the chat. You know, we disconnect from ourselves and from the other. Yeah, we do all these types of things. So I'm going to play this and hopefully you'll be able to see it. It's a very short little film. Some of you will have seen it before, about blame. So, can you hear it?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear
Yeah,
you.
we can hear it.
How many of you are blamers? How many of you, when something goes wrong, the first thing you want to know is whose fault it is? Hi, my name is Brene. I'm a blamer. Let me just tell you this quick story. So this is a couple years ago when I first realized the magnitude to which I blame. I'm in my house, I have on white slacks and a pink sweater set, and I'm drinking a cup of coffee in my kitchen. It's a full cup of coffee. I drop it on the tile floor. It goes into a million pieces, splashes up all over me. And a millisecond after it hit the floor, right out of my mouth is this: damn you, Steve. Who's my husband? Because let me tell you how fast this works for me. So Steve plays water polo with a group of friends. And the night before, he went to go play water polo. And I said, hey, make sure you come back at 10, because I can never fall asleep until you're home. And he got back like at 10:30. And so I went to bed a little bit later than I thought. Ergo, my second cup of coffee that I probably would not be having had he come home when we discussed. Therefore, and so the rest of the story is I'm cleaning up the kitchen. Steve calls, caller ID. I'm like, hey. He's like, hey, what's going on, babe? What's going on? So I'll tell you exactly what's going on. I'm cleaning up the coffee that spilled all like dial tone. Because he knows. How many of you go to that place when something bad happens, the first thing you want to know is whose fault is it? I'd rather it be my fault than no one's fault. Because why? Why? Because it gives us some semblance of control. But here, if you enjoy blaming, this is where you should stick your fingers in your ear and do the no thing, because I'm getting ready to ruin it for you. Because here's what we know from the research. Blame is simply the discharging of discomfort and pain. It has an inverse relationship with accountability. Accountability, by definition, is a vulnerable process. It means me calling you and saying, hey, my feelings were really hurt about this, and talking. It's not blaming. Blaming is simply a way that we discharge anger. People who blame a lot seldom have the tenacity and grit to actually hold people accountable, because we expend all of our energy raging for 15 seconds and figuring out whose fault something is. And blaming is very corrosive in relationships. And it's one of the reasons we miss our opportunities for empathy. Because when something happens and we're hearing a story, we're not really listening. We're in the place where I was, making the connections as quickly as we can about whose fault something was.
Okay, so that's Brené and blaming. So, but I really like that. I really like her idea that blame is, when we blame, we're discharging discomfort and pain. And again, I think what's really important is the inverse relationship with accountability. I think for those of us who are she has a great one on empathy, and I have that further on down the line here. So, so anyway, so the restorative continuum ranges from informal conversations like relationship building, through informal conversations, through circles, through meetings, to formal types of victim offender dialogue. Or victim offender dialogue is so saying, well, it's cut and dried. It's often not cut and dried, but it might be dialogue between, people who were there, who were there when the harm was there. Also the idea of working with shame, I think, is really, really important, because even if I wasn't, if I know it wasn't my responsibility, if I understand all the reasons, there can still be shame that it happened on my watch. There can still be shame that even I allowed it to happen if I'm the person who experienced the harm. So it's based on needs, it's based on respectful engagement, and it's very much based on fairness of process. So because we will accept what has to happen if we believe the process is fair, and really a huge part of the process being fair is being heard and being properly heard, not just a token hearing, before a decision gets made without you. And another big concept in restorative practice is the idea of working with. So that's the sort of a lady called Vandering. She has a relationships window, and there's the doing to window, where we say, okay, this is what you need to do, this is what needs to happen. And there's the doing for window, and that's sort of like, what they call permissive paternalism in some way. So like, I'm going to help you now, I'm going to do what you need to do. Often you find people who are in therapy can end up in that sort of nearly dependency situation, and that the therapist, may be sometimes overprotective with people. So it's about, not always, but it's about really empowering and figuring out that people will know what they need and what they want, given space and time and consideration, and asking good Socratic style questions so that they can reflect on what happened. The other overriding thing, which I'm sure you all do in all of the types of work that you do, is reflective practice. You can't do any of this stuff without, having reflective practice. Without, we need that. If you're going to be a restorative organization, where you're really showing care for everybody, and you're expecting everybody to show care for everybody as well, so your expectations are high, but your support is high. And that's one of the ideas of a restorative organization. It's a learning organization, and fairness of process is really important in this. And I have another little video for you. Here we have, and again, this is a little thing on fairness. It's very, sorry, excuse me, it's very self-explanatory. And I'll just widen it a little bit. Okay.
So a final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs and with birds and with chimpanzees, but with Sarah Brosnan, we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group, they know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now, if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, it's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. He tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protesting.
So I just hope, I just hope that she got that grape eventually. I always, after every time I see that. So yeah, so you might just, these are there's a couple of poll questions. There, what do you need when you experience harm, or what do you need when you've caused harm? So Lorette, I think you were telling me I'd have to put in something to see them, but so I'll hopefully be able to see the poll.
Catherine, we have the Slido live, but I'm not sure if it's actually working. So Kelly is putting the question into the chat as well for
Very good,
people to
very
just
good.
give feedback there.
Perfect,
you.
perfect, lovely, thank you. Great. So, okay, that's grand. So anyway, what do you need when you have been harmed, and what do you need when you have caused harm? So these are things, you know, maybe to take the first one first. When you have experienced harm, think of a time. What did you need then? Support, to be acknowledged. Brilliant. To be listened to, absolutely. To be listened to for both. Yeah, absolutely. A safe space. Brilliant. Yeah. Listened to. Understanding. Communication and discussions. Yeah. Reassurance of safety. Acknowledged. One of the things that we found in the work, you know, that work between also with Jesuits and with past pupils who had been abused, one of the things that we found out in our evaluation that was really, really important was continued communication. Continued communication. Like, the worst thing that you could do to people who have experienced harm is ignore them. You know, now maybe you might, you know, you also need to know if people are saying, look, leave me alone, come back to me and whatever. But, you know, that's what we found anyway, was really important. And it developed trust in us as facilitators, support and practical intervention. Yeah, really good. Thank you very much. Wanting to know there will be change for others. It's so like what we heard when, you know, when we heard with the past people what they wanted to make sure it never happened again for anybody else. To the extent that some people really had it in it. They were saying, well, it's much less likely to happen in our much more egalitarian society now, and the power dynamics are very different between the church and the people, if you like. But they even said, what's going to happen in the rest of the world? How can you as Jesuits make sure that it doesn't happen in your name elsewhere? If you can think of a time where, however inadvertently, you were in some way the cause of hurt or harm to somebody else, what did you need then? And I'd be really interested to, you know, to own it. Yeah. Support. Forgiveness. To apologize. Absolutely. Yeah. Support, timely process. A chance to apologize and explain. Wonderful. To apologize and explain. Listener confidentiality. Yeah. Really good. A chance to be forgiven. Honesty. You need for yourself to try not to do it again. An opportunity to be accountable and to offer acceptance. Brilliant. Absolutely. Yeah, and you know, a non-judgmental space where you feel you're not going to be judged or seen as maybe the awful person that you might think you are at that moment in time. You know, I've certainly had experience of, you know, times to understand what went wrong and how systems, how can I make sure it doesn't happen again? You know, yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you. Why restorative practice? Compassion and understanding. Very good. So one of the reasons we say that restorative practice, and you can put this into any scenario, you know, and because I think it's going to support and help, you know, organizations develop and grow and be better for everybody. But shame, I said it already, that shame manifests in many destructive ways, but it can be a positive vehicle for change. Now, Brené Brown would disagree, but you know, I would believe that it can be a motivator. You know, belonging is a core need that must be acknowledged. So when something happens, the fear of being, you know, expelled, I think, is primal. That we will not, you know, we will be expelled from our group. We will be, you know, seen as less than by our peers. It allows self-worth to grow and develop. And it's a developmental process to be involved in. If you're a restorative organization, you're a developmental organization, you're a learning organization. You know, so the shame can be negative due to the risk of expulsion, and that's what, you know, that's the opposite to the belonging, you know, and that's a core basic need, the belonging. So this is mirroring a little bit of what you just said earlier about what you needed for why restorative practice, you know, when harm has happened. Well, maybe the opportunity to face my fears, as Alva Griffith did in the film The Meeting. I might have questions, I might have statements that I want to say. Like Alva, one of her messages to the guy who abused her, and to the judge who sentenced the guy, and the judge said to him, "You have ruined this young woman's life." And she said to herself, "He does not have the power to ruin my life, and that judge does not have the power, should not have said that." So one of her real reasons for going to see this guy is to saying, "I am actually okay. You have not ruined my life. No, I have questions for you, but you have not ruined my life." She wanted to understand how come her, was it random? Was she being followed? You know, she had questions that she wanted. Also relational disconnection from the person who was responsible for the harm. And again, just to use her as an example, she speaks about, you know, leaving the court, leaving and seeing him in the car park talking to his solicitor. And she said, and he just looked like an ordinary man. And he didn't look like the monster that was in her head. So by going through the process, she had to, a lot of her family and friends, you know, had grave concerns about her going through the process, because of course they wanted to protect her. So, but she wanted it, and so she was able to disconnect, and as she says, change the memory card of what happened. Help them achieve an internal resolution of a sort that they can get on with their lives. So if you have an experience of powerlessness and disempowerment, to have some sort of an experience of power, and you know, is important. For those who have been harmed, facing their fears and their shame, maybe feeling indebted and wanting to pay back and give the opportunity to the person who they harmed to confront them. They may want to apologize and express sorrow. And again, in restorative practice, you be very careful about when apologies come, because if you apologize before you've heard about the impact and the ripple effect, you don't know what you're apologizing for. So apology, the timing of apology is really important, and to apologize with the knowledge that it may not be accepted. So there's a huge difference between apologizing for the person you harmed or that was harmed, rather than apologizing with a wish to be forgiven or whatever, you know. So I call forgiveness the F word. So so help people achieve some internal resolution. So a lot of what people need, as came when you put up your list there, and I'd be really interested if we can get that list. I think it'd be very informative that you put in the chat to see whether that you know, that it mirrors this, and so people need to make sense of what happened, and they need to know that what happened mattered. That it is also important to the people responsible, that it matters, that they matter. It's a safe space to talk about what happened. The need to be heard, need to be believed. I know you've said all that already. That this should never happen again, and the need to know why. So, and this is the same thing for those people who have been harmed. So I am now 12:10. Will I continue for a few minutes, Loretta? Yes, please do. Yeah. Okay, you're good for me to keep going. Grand. I've done this already. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Oh yes, so this is what everybody needs to be heard without judgment and with empathy. So this is another little, some of you have seen this already and said how good it was. So we're going to just play that now.
How many of you are blamers? How many of you, when something goes wrong, the first thing you want to know is whose fault it is?
Oh, sorry,
Hi,
wrong
my
one.
name is Brene.
Wrong
I'm a
one.
blamer. Let me just tell you this quick story. So this is a couple years ago when I first.
Sorry, wrong one. That was supposed to be empathy. So anyway, you can look her up, Brené Brown, on empathy, or we can send you the link for the little, it's a 3-minute one about how important empathy is and what you don't say if you're empathizing. I have a lovely friend who, if ever I'm in the doldrums about something, she would say, well, at least this, at least that. What you don't say if you're being empathic is saying at least. So, you know, it's about really just being there and not trying to fix it. Just being there and understanding, getting a glimpse of what it might be like for that person. You know, and seeing what they need then. So we've spoken about all this already. So the trauma-centered approaches are really important. I don't really have time to go into that. Attending to the ripple effects of harm, so important. Focusing on, so we've done all that there, equal concern for those harmed and those who have harmed. It doesn't mean that you're neutral to the fact that harm happened, but you treat everybody with respect and non-judgment. So you support harm, you know, how do you support those harmed to name needs for healing, and you try and help people move out of isolation and into sort of reintegration. So circle processes are used in a very proactive way and in a responsive way. So you can use them for difficult, painful issues, getting people gathering together, getting to speak, to challenge people. In that case with the Jesuits and that, so we had, you know, the former headmaster who was around at the time and was actually the person responsible for actually getting him out of the school. The man who is now deceased who abused the boys, but he attended a meeting with 9 past pupils because they had questions for him and answers for them. So that was a restorative, and that was very difficult for him. Now, we supported him before and afterwards, and he was he was up for it, and he was willing to do it. He was prepared to be vulnerable, if you like. and others, many other Jesuits did join as well, and people who knew the priest who had abused. You know, one of the questions from the past peoples was, how could you not know? How could you not know about that? So there's different questions people have, you know, and again, there's building trust is so important, and trust is very, very fragile. When you're building relationships, if there has been a sort of a different system and a different culture, building trust takes time. So people will actually know, well, actually it is a different regime. If you don't hear people, so the people who were in that restorative class with me and the HSE people, what they heard was people who were completely dedicated to their work and, you know, were completely committed to making a difference. And that's what they were doing that course for. So there's another really good little video that's 20 minutes long, and it's, I think, one of the best restorative practice videos you could watch, because it's the author Chimamanda Adichie, and she talks about the danger of a single story. Like, so, and in a way, if you don't experience it, you can't know it. And it's a really good, I'd recommend it. And you know, you'll have these slides. So if you just Google the danger of a single story, you'll get it. It's very good. Now, I don't think I have really much time to go into narrative dialogue, because but really narrative dialogue, yeah, we will send out the slides to everybody. Narrative dialogue is how we help people make sense and meaning of their lives through their stories. And basically when people come into a meeting, they come in with their own story. And I'm not saying story in any sort of a derogatory term. They come in with, you know, their experience and their story, and maybe what they have told told other people. What you hope as a narrative dialogue facilitator or restorative facilitator, that in somehow the meeting gives people re-stories. So that meeting between the HSE employees and the other restorative practice students gave them a different story of the HSE. So a human to human encounter gives us, and good Socratic questions where we're not just operating on the surface, gives us an opportunity to you know, to see things in a different way. So we come away with a different story, something maybe more complex, more developed, more understanding, and hopefully we'll have more understanding. So some of the questions that you asked, the type of, what was the harm, the impact of harm? What was it? How did it affect you? What about now? What helped? You know, what did you do? What did you need? And who was harmed? So I'm just going to move on here now, because I know I need to get out of here. So I'm going to finish with a little case study that's, but this is, you know, if you were going through a process, a formal process, you would have a lot of preparation done. You'd have, you know, sort of what you call ground rules, or I may prefer to say terms of engagement, an outline of what's going to happen, introductions, who's going to speak first, what's going to be the format for speaking, is there going to be room for open dialogue, truth telling, telling your story, talking about impact, asking questions, talking about needs, what can be done now, what could be done later, reality testing, agreements, closure, and possible follow-up. So, I mean, and again, you change. So these are my working assumptions, and I'm going to finish with that. I think people are more than the best or worst thing that they ever did. We are reduced by single stories. When we're hurt, we disconnect from ourselves and others. When we are disconnected, shame keeps us in hiding. Restoration happens when we can reconnect. Relationships help shape our identity from which we derive meaning. By repairing our relationships with ourselves and then with others, our issues and conflicts can be addressed and managed. To build a fairer, more equitable society, we need to hear the other's story. We need to be able to experience a little, we can't experience it, of course, a little of what it's like in the other person's shoes. If you get a glimpse, you're connected. When people know the impact they have and they know they are not damned, they can do better. So they're my working assumptions. So I'm going to move on. Yeah, that's an example. I'm going to send you these examples of and those who said they were harmed said they needed to understand. So that's it. So there's I'm going to let you read this yourselves, and I'm going to come away and stop sharing. And I will read a little that somebody who told me about their experience of, you know, when harm happened to their family in the, and it was a health service, a nameless health service, who also had an open disclosure system going. And in some ways thought their experience of the system was very, their experience of the system was actually quite restorative. So I'm just going to actually say it in a couple of minutes. So it's about a time a number of years ago when a woman in childbirth there was a crisis. So there was an incident happened and a crisis, and she was not doing well, and there had to be intervention, and there was a risk to the life of the mother and the child. Both lived, but the mother emerged with brain damage. So the mother had brain damage, and the father in the story, in this real live case, talks about his absolute anger and his distress at what happened. And he said initially he wanted to just blame, and he wanted somewhere to put his anger and his grief and his pain because he'd lost the wife he knew. And he, as I say, there was an open disclosure system there as well. You know, it was the open disclosure system that, so when he went through that, he experienced it as quite healing. You know, and what he really appreciated was that people allowed him time. He said, you know, as time goes on now, he has changed. And he doesn't really, we asked him what did he want that was remaining, and he didn't really want anything from the health service, because he really felt that they did their very best for him. They were timely, important people came to ask to meet him, wanted to make sure he was all right. They put in supports, huge supports for the family. At one stage he was thinking about, but he said, actually, the one thing that really hurt him at the time was that he felt one person didn't trust, one person who was involved and took action, which he believed didn't trust the system enough to be fully open in that open disclosure system. And so for him, he found that very difficult at the time. But he says now, as time has gone on, and he thinks about that person, and he thinks they may be full of guilt. They may not realize that when he thinks to that time now, and he looks at his child who's thriving, that he knows that she took action to save everybody at that moment in time, and she was involved in a terrible, terrible critical emergency, and he would love her to know not to be guilty. And so in some way that his experience of the whole process was very restorative. He trusted the process, and the process, it didn't let him down eventually. Like, he had very anger towards that person, but that's what he would like now. If he had a chance to meet that person, he would like them to know that. So that's my end note. You've 5 minutes, Loretta, for questions. I'm fine. I can stay here all day. But anyway, so that's the end of me.
It was very, very powerful presentation, Catherine. So huge thank you to you from all of us that you have taken the time. I know we've had a couple of technical glitches, but
I'm
thank you
so
to the
sorry
audience
about
for
that. And yeah,
sticking. That's okay.
oh, yeah.
Look, we are huge fans of your work, and we think it's really important and something that's very relevant to the health service. I think there are a couple of questions, maybe. I don't know, Kelly, are you going to manage them?
Yeah, Lorraine, so there's a few comments and questions coming into the chat, so thanks everybody for those. So just firstly, how can we introduce restorative practice into the HSE? If you'd just like to answer that.
You can take that one if that's okay with
Yeah.
the group.
Thanks, Lorraine, because I couldn't.
But please join in. Okay, so as Catherine said, restorative practice is about building the bridges. It's about repairing the harm and learning, and giving us an opportunity to right the wrong. So it's a way of working with conflict that allows a form of dialogue, a psychologically safe place for the people involved in the incident, which offers us the opportunity to grow as a community in healthcare. So in terms of the HSE, restorative practice is in the HSE, but it's not called restorative practice. We have it in our open disclosure principles and our process and policies, in our incident management framework, in the way that we manage our complaints. So what we need to do is grow and enhance restorative practice into everyday practice. And it's seen as the norm. As Catherine said, it's about fairness of the process, it's about respect, and it's about inclusivity of the key stakeholders associated to the incident, the event that happened, and it's to look through that window. It's to look through the window of the building the bridges. We have our systems and processes in place, but it's about making it everyday practice.
Thank you, Kelly. Anything else for us?
Thanks, Loretta. So just, I suppose, follow on from that, how can restorative practice support the incident management review process?
Now I don't want to take the stage, but I can give an answer to that one. I suppose it's about the restorative practice, restorative culture, and use it as a way of a learning approach when things go wrong. So our reviews look at the systems and keep in line with the principles of the incident management framework. And looking at the principles, as Catherine said, about restorative practice, it's about that person-centeredness, the openness and transparency, excuse me, the fair and just way, and responsiveness, improvement focused, and learning in our system. And I suppose to be able to build that trust as well. So an example of that would be back in 2019, there was a restorative approach to review taken in the management of surgical meshes, and that was through the New Zealand. It was commissioned by the Minister of Health in New Zealand, and basically, just to give you a synopsis of it, the Health Minister instigated a restorative practice and justice approach to exploring the harm caused by surgical mesh in New Zealand. And the principles then of that approach was to listen to the patients, to listen to the staff, to listen to the key stakeholders, address the problem, and inform the actions and learning forward. And we're going to put the link into the chat if anybody wants to read the report. And in the conclusion of the report, then it says then it's only through the restoration of institutional relationships characterized by trust and partnership that well-being can be restored, actions implemented, and future harm reduced or prevented. So we have precedents there, as like I say, in terms of the support for reviews and we have our principles incorporated in our systems and processes and policies.
Great, Loretta, thank you. And there's just some comments in as well, looking at how the principles and processes could apply going forward, some of the stuff that Catherine spoke about. So maybe just to finish, Lorraine, if you want to talk about, you know, what's next, what's the next steps and where to from here.
Thank you, Kelly, and look, apologies again for taking a bit of an incident management and open disclosure lens to this topic. We see it as another avenue, another, I suppose, offering in response to incident management when things go wrong, patients or service users are harmed. And I suppose for me, my role was often left me dissatisfied with incident management, the dissatisfaction with the incident management process afterwards. And we know that when persons are harmed, that it can lead to an escalation through many of our layers within the health service, when really what they want is to speak with the services, speak with those involved with regards to the incidents and having that good communication. And you've given some good examples around open disclosure. We had a very interesting presentation from Jane O'Hara a little while ago, and focusing again on that relation of peace and the compounded harm that can occur when the incident management process isn't managed well. And then we've also focused on just culture, peace and restorative just culture. So it's about joining all these developments together, really trying to influence the culture within the HSE. And obviously, Catherine, you know, we'll be linking in with you quite a bit because you are really an expert in this place. We know there are a number of restorative practitioners, and how can we tap into that and make that as an offering? Because as you said, it's a voluntary process. So it's not that this would be something that would be forced on anyone, but certainly we want to raise awareness around restorative practice, the benefits. Ultimately, of course, we'd like to see restorative culture within the HSE and implementing that going forward. And as I mentioned, it's not just incident management, open disclosure. It might be applied to incidents where there are issues around access to services or anything like that, where services can meet with those and really parties can listen to one another and get an understanding. Well, actually, what has been the harm for this person who's not accessing service, and understanding maybe some of the challenges within the services, and really fostering that kind of culture around it. So watch this space. We hope to do a lot more around it over the next little while. And we're very grateful that so many of you attended today. So hopefully, I suppose as somebody said in the chat, it's food for thought, isn't it? Any last questions, Kelly? I'm mindful of the time and that we probably need to wrap things up a little bit. Catherine, is there anything else you wanted to say as a
I just think, you know, like if you were rolling, like you said, there's a lot in, you know, as Loretta says, your department you're running restorative practice, but I think actually just starting small, starting with pilots, you know, maybe with an overarching strategy, and then figuring out, well, where will we start? You know, it's taking it in. You know, there's different people, you know, there's actually an article by some group who discuss whether you do a big rollout thing or whether you actually, you know, do pilots and then do the rollout. You know, I suppose you're maybe gathering momentum and gathering interest and maybe gathering a bit of evidence for its workability. I mean, that's one option, you know.
So I'm sure you'll be getting calls from us again after this webinar. Thank you again. Thank you for your time. And
well, thank you very much. I'm sure it was absolutely lovely. Thank you for asking me, and I'm delighted. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And I think we just have a few closing slides from our team.
Yeah, thanks, Lorraine, and thank you, Catherine, also for that excellent presentation. And thank everyone for all your interaction and discussion. It's been absolutely brilliant. Just very quick few closing slides, just to highlight again our e-learning module 1, which is mandatory for all staff in the HSE services. It's CPD accredited, and our e-learning module 2, applying principles to practice, which again is mandatory for all staff who are involved in the open disclosure process. And both modules are available on HSE Land. We want to just let you know that our next webinar in our webinar series for this year will be on Valentine's Day on the 14th of February, again from 11 to 12:30. And the next webinar will focus on the Patient Safety Act and its implementation in the HSE. And some of our leads in our HSE implementation work streams will be presenting on the different components of that work and give you further information, I suppose, on what the implications for your services there may be in implementing this act. So that will be a very interesting webinar, and we will be sending you further information on that. Just to flag, the QPS Talk Time webinar on Tuesday next week is another interesting one on Civility Saves Lives. That will be presented by Professor Eva Doherty and Dr. Chris Turner, who's a consultant in emergency medicine in the NHS in the UK. So that may be of interest to you. Just to let you know, you will receive a short email after our webinar and a link to our evaluation. We'd really appreciate any feedback that you would provide for us, and it helps us in planning future webinars. And again, apologies for the technical challenges we had at the beginning. We hope it didn't affect your enjoyment of the webinar, and thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. I hope you all have a lovely day, and I'm not sure if we mentioned Happy New Year, and certainly a big agenda for open disclosure over the year ahead, and we look forward to working with you on that. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.